So what happens in the Philippines once, of course, native resistance is subdued after the war? Once the Philippines becomes official unincorporated territory of the United States, after the insular cases are passed by the Supreme Court, well, the U.S. does embark on this mission to modernize the Philippines. So they kept their promise in that regard, okay, to bring modern infrastructure, especially in the urban areas, like modern roads, modern bridges, modern buildings, and other types of infrastructure, modern sanitation systems. In terms of government, the colonial government would be structured based on a U.S. style of government, meaning, three branches of the government, right? Legislative, executive, and judicial. They're going to have, of course, elected officials because that's how democracies operate. And in terms of education also, there's going to be free state-sponsored public education provide for all children in the Philippines. And it's going to be taught in English. And you're going to see, in fact, hundreds of American women coming over to work as school teachers in the new colony. And even culture. You're going to see the spread of American culture. It's going to be very popular in the new colony eventually. So, on the surface, prima facie, they seem to be good things, all this stuff. But let's think a little more critically. How can we argue that such institutions, though they seem positive, how can you argue that they have a negative side from the viewpoint of Filipino natives? Okay, they seem to be the beneficiaries of all this good stuff of, modern life. Well, think about the effects of colonialism in this regard, right? What it does is impart upon the natives this feeling that the colonizing race, in this case, it's the American race, so to speak. Okay, well, let's use the term Anglo-Saxon because that's how they thought of it at the turn of the 20th century. The Anglo race is indeed inherently superior to them, the natives. So it does a bunch of stuff. It quells the will to resist colonial rule, right, among the natives, because they start accepting him. Why did they start accepting them? Because through all these institutions, again, they start to believe in the inherent superiority of the white race, right? So, again, it instills in natives the superiority of the colonizer and the inferiority of the colonized, right? And the colonized Filipinos, they almost internalize this decorum of inferiority, right? An inferiority complex, if you will, right? Of submission and subjugation even, and always deferring to, well, I shouldn't say always, okay, because there's always going to be some anti-colonial people in the Philippines, in its history. But nonetheless, for the most part, it's very effective, I have to say. Now, at this point, we could start to discuss the beginning of Filipino American history. And here it brings us to this interesting connection between colonialism and immigration in modern history. And the two, as I mentioned on the slide, are two sides of the same historical coin. So let's unpack what this means. Well, migration starts with the colonizers, right? Imagine on a map, for example, and you're looking at the migratory flow of people in this map, even across oceans and continents, what have you. Okay, so in this case, let's think about the United States and the Philippines. So you see the colonizers migrating from the United States across the Pacific, moving west, and they reach the Philippines. And to use their term, that's migration from the metropole, what would be the mother country, right, for Filipinos. And then they were going to the periphery, to the Philippines, okay? And then, subsequent to that, you see migration of colonial subjects from the colony, in this case, the Philippines, to the mother country or the metropole. So, the best way to imagine this is from a so called bird's eye viewpoint or bird's eye perspective, as I note here in the slide. What do we mean by that? Imagine just this migratory movement of people in general, people moving, in this case, from the United States to the Philippines, right? And then you're going to see people from the Philippines migrating to the United States. But don't think of it in terms of nation or race. Just think of it in terms of, and then generically, in terms of people, just people moving from the metropole to the periphery, and then from the periphery to the metropole. So when you disassociate it from race and nation and look at it as just human migration, here hopefully it makes sense, this idea that colonialism and immigration are two sides of the same historical coin. Now, history is, of course, we're acknowledging that it's a form of colonialism, right? And of course, we're acknowledging it's a form of immigration, but we're also looking at it from human migration in general, all right? So that's what we mean by colonialism and immigration by two sides of the same historical coin. Now, examples of this abound here. Of course, we're talking about the Filipinos that are eventually going to migrate to the United States. But think of other empires and their history of immigration when you think about the colonized going to the colonizer's country, right? For example, the English Empire. If you go even today to, let's say, London, you'll see that the ethnic minorities in England and London, well, the biggest one is probably Indians, right? Pakistanis, in national terms, Indians and Pakistanis. So why is that the case? Why did Indians or Pakistanis end up in England? It's because of this connection here, right? First, the English went to India and they colonized the place, and subsequently you see the migration of Indians to the metropole. Same with France. If you go to Paris today, well, you'll see their racial minorities are mostly originating from North Africa. Again, you ask, why is this the case? Well, it's precisely due to this interconnection between colonialism and immigration. The French Empire went to parts of North Africa and they colonized the area. And subsequent to that, you see Algerians and other racial groups journeying from the periphery to the metropole. And this is exactly the framework that we're going to see operating when the Filipinos first reached the United States. And here you have to think about this interesting condition here. For the first time in American history, we're going to have colonial subjects coming to the United States. How are they going to be received as such? Now, first thing to take note of is that the Filipinos are wards, as we acknowledge. They are U.S. nationals. And because they're not aliens, technically speaking, this means that they could freely migrate to the United States. And this sets them apart from other Asians. Indeed, we know that there's such a thing as the 1882 Chinese Exclusion Act that prohibits immigration of Chinese laborers, at least, from China. And we also know there's the Gentleman's Agreement in effect that prohibits labor immigration from Japan. So here is a new repository, if you will, of Asian laborers that could be a source of cheap labor. And indeed, this would explain in large measure the first significant flow, that is. When I say significant, I mean in numbers. The first significant flow of Filipinos to the mother country. And again, I pose this question, which I just did earlier. What happens when Americans are forced to confront their new colonial subjects that happen to be migrating to the mother country? And again, the context will be largely economic, as a source of cheap labor. Now, moving on to a sort of general analysis of this migration of little brown brothers to America. Well, the first wave will be what I'm about to discuss here, the first two waves, I should say. There's very early migration of students, Filipino students, to attend American colleges. Why are they doing this? Well, right away, when we're setting up the colonial structures in the Philippines, we realize that it's better to place natives in positions of, let's say, bureaucracy, right? In the places of officialdom throughout the colony's colonial administration. So what we do is train them, basically. We train students who happen to be gifted, who demonstrate high aptitude to attend college in the United States, law school, what have you. And then they return to the Philippines and they assume these very positions in this colonial bureaucracy, as I mentioned, okay? The name for them, by the way, is pensionados, and it's derived from pension because the fact that they demonstrated high academic inclination, that means that they're talented enough to receive a pension. They're chosen, right, among the chosen few to attend schools in the United States to return and, again, fill out those important positions. But significantly, and I say that again in numbers, because the pensionados won't be a significant number. When it comes to a significant number, and I mean thousands, therefore, it'll be the agricultural laborers on the West Coast. And this will occur in the 1920s, more the later 1920s, spilling over into the 1930s. And then the last two waves, well, they're no longer technically little brown brothers. Why? It's because independence was granted to the Philippines in 1946 with the end of World War II. Now they are post-colonial, to use a term, post-colonial subjects, all right? The Philippines is a sovereign nation, and they're Filipino citizens, right? Philippine citizens. But they still have that strong neo-colonial, to use our term, neo-colonial relation with the ex-mother country, right? The former mother country. So these two waves will occur during this time. Post-World War II nurses and Navy men, and I say in the U.S. Navy, not the Philippine Navy. And then we'll see another wave of post-1965 immigrants. And as opposed to, the second wave, which is mostly unskilled labor, these post-1965 immigrants, many of them at least, will be professionals, especially in the healthcare industry, like nurses, of course, and doctors and what have you. And we will have another discussion of that in a later topic later in the course, but many of them will come in through this process known as chain migration, which again we'll discuss very soon. So let's begin our discussion of the first significant wave, which was the second wave, if you recall. And I have to say this, that at first the Filipinos were sent to Hawaii. We actually discussed this in the context of Japanese migration to the sugar plantations, if you recall. Why did they end up in Hawaii? Well, now you know, right? They are now colonial subjects of the United States. They are now a new source of cheap labor that can migrate wherever they're needed. And surely the American sugar plantation owners needed that cheap labor.